Now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, may I congratulate Judge Hofmensky, the President of the International Criminal Court, on the presentation of a well-rounded report of the ICC presented to this August Assembly. Although Sri Lanka is not a member of the ICC statute, it keenly follows the rich jurisprudence associated with the ICC and wish to place a few observations with a view to provoking some thought with regard to its jurisdiction. Mr. President, it is observed that the ICC statute refers to peace to some degree. By recognizing that grave crimes that deeply shocks the conscience of humanity, threatens the peace, security and well-being of the world, and affirms that the most serious crimes of concern of the international community as a whole must not go unpunished. This was the primary reason that the International Criminal Court was established, thereby stressing the primary judicial function of the newly established court for the purpose of ending impunity and contributing to the prevention of such crimes. Having said that, it must be appreciated that the ICC statute was not drafted with a specific country situation in mind, as was the case with the ad hoc tribunals. It is observed that the statute is concerned with the prosecution of crimes against humanity in peacetime, irrespective of the fact that the Criminal Act is not necessarily connected with an armed conflict. It is therefore seen, Mr. President, that the aforementioned goals to be achieved by the International Criminal Court, in keeping with the resolutions and statutes establishing international criminal courts and tribunals, as well as by domestic prosecution of international crimes, especially within the framework of the ICC statute, begs the question, I say, as to what the precise parameters were for the mandate of these international judicial tribunals. The mandate on an examination of the tribunals appears to be twofold. On the one hand, dealing with impunity for serious criminal conduct affecting the international community, and on the other hand, dealing with the maintenance of peace and security. A matter that the ICC, in my view, can give its mind to, respectively, respectfully, is to whether there is a seamless cause and effect between the respect for the rule of law and international peace and security, so that the implementation of a mandate to prosecute alleged criminality will in and of itself contribute to international peace and security. Mr. President, to put it differently, is the International Criminal Tribunal, as the academics ask, was to bring about security and stability strictly limited to the impact of its primary judicial function? Or does it include other tasks that the tribunals have been entrusted with for achieving this objective? These are matters, I say, for the consideration of the ICC. Although there is little doubt that the ICC can contribute to peace and security in international relations and should prevent the recurrence of such crimes, it remains to be answered, I say, as to what extent it can go in making such contribution. It is observed that the ICC and the tribunals are mandated to bring peace where there is conflict, provide reparation, and re-establish the rule of law. All these objectives, I say, no doubt contribute to the establishment of peace and security. But do these goals, I ask, fall within the competence of an international tribunal as far as they entail additional activities beyond, I say, the strict exercise of its judicial functions? Distinguished delegates, there appears to be no clear answer to these issues. We have heard statements made even by the members of the international judiciary that administering justice is only the task of an international criminal court, while reconciliation is a matter for national communities and its institutions. Some academics are of the view that this position appears to be too radical in tracing a mutually exclusive separation of its jurisdiction. They say that this leads to the neglect of the fact that a tribunal, notwithstanding its independence and impartiality, is not an abstract entity, but operates within the social environment under which laws it was established. In this scenario, it is well to remember, I say, that criminal justice cannot be shifted entirely from the domestic to the international level, and that the primary responsibility for prosecution rests with the states and their judiciaries. A view has been expressed that the international courts are a temporary and objectively limited replacement of domestic jurisdictions, which ultimately bear the primary responsibility for re-establishing the rule of law and restoring security and stability in the national society. They too must contribute to reaching these goals. How far then can this contribution go is a matter for each court to assess and may depend on the concrete situation in which the court is operating. However, this dual accountability of an international court should not, in my view, be glossed over. Mr. President, we see that international criminal courts pursue a host of ambitious goals through their proceedings to establish the truth about crimes alleged, to end impunity for serious international crimes, and to model respect for human rights in their proceedings. Yet, while these hallowed principles are highlighted in the court's founding documents and in case law, in practice, a less hallowed goal, namely resolving cases efficiently, is seen to soon becoming the central feature in the administration of international criminal justice. Though through probably no fault of the court, but because donors and the court administrators take stock of the substantial costs of international trials, they begin to place demands on judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys to do more with fewer resources. Mr. President, efficiency, no doubt, is an important goal for international criminal courts for a multitude of reasons. It ensures defendants' rights to a speedy trial, promotes victims' interests in closure, conserves limited resources, and helps provide justice in as many cases as possible. Yet, as the brief history of modern international criminal procedure has shown, we cannot sacrifice justice on the altar of expediency, as this can lead to the erosion of the protection of individual rights and the search for the truth. We have seen this trend in some of the criminal tribunals of yesterday, where the tribunals, under pressure from donors, have introduced several managerial reforms which has some impact on the presentation of defenses. We have observed that scholars and even some judges found the procedural reforms giving undue precedence to judicial economy over fairness. Mr. President, we observe that in recent times, judges at the International Court have begun introducing reforms aimed at improving the efficiency of the court, which no doubt is a good thing in principle, which mitigates undue delay. But a thought that worries Defense Counsel remains an unanswered question as to whether judicial managerialism has also circumscribed defense activities. We must guard ourselves to ensure judicial managerialism does not lead to restrictions on defense investigations. It is heartening, I say finally, to note that defense attorneys do not perceive judicial managerialism as an impediment to adequate representation at the ICC. We have heard them say, while respondents complained about insufficient financial and institutional support for defense work, that this responsibility should be placed on the registry and state parties and certainly not on our judges. There was, of course, the view that has been expressed that defense attorneys thought judges should give greater weight to defendants' rights inasmuch as they would wish to protect the rights and interests of victims. Finally, Mr. President, it is clear that the International Criminal Court aims to promote not only justice, but also peace. Notwithstanding what the critics have to say, the ICC has contributed significantly to the promotion of the international justice and peace, and has made a major impact on the prevention of crime. And since its prosecutions represent a clear threat, I say, to highly placed individuals, who commit serious crimes. Now, despite all this, it is a court with an ethical aim, that is the prosecution of criminals, and it is gaining in legitimacy. It could attract states which want to show their support for the defense of human rights. Mr. President, it has been said that the ICC must, however, guard itself from state leaders who ask the ICC to act against respondents in order to reinforce their own regime and authority, thereby seeking to turn the ICC into their political instruments. Any such overtures, I say, must be discouraged at the highest level, as to do otherwise would contribute to the creation of an unjust, illegal system, as these political actors want the court to focus on one side of the conflict. Finally, the Assembly, I would say, is confident that the ICC will respond to such overtures appropriately. Mr. President, Sri Lanka thanks you for giving it the opportunity of making these observations. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.